define some of these terms or redefine some of these terms when we began to think about people with cognitive disabilities in particular, included in humankind, whereas before they really have been segregated out. So why a convention? That is my very quick introduction to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Why do we have a convention? The other UN treaties, CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child, Convention to Eliminate Discrimination Against Women, discrimination on the basis of racial discrimination, as well as our main political, economic, social, and cultural human rights treaties, all include individuals with disabilities. They are not excluded from those treaties. However, studies that were done, and these are legal studies, which are not exactly the same kind of research studies many of you are involved in, but were very consistent in their findings, which were those treaties were not used to advocate on behalf of individuals with disabilities, or very clear indicators that somehow individuals with disabilities were separate, different. They weren't excluded, but they were not included in any implementation measures. Now, when the CRC was passed, which was the latest convention prior to this one, the UN included sections in there very clearly addressing children with disabilities. And it was the first time in any of those treaties that disability had been sort of a subset of this other vulnerable population that was included in the treaty, children. So for the CRC, I think we do now have a lot of focus in implementation of that convention on kids with disabilities, children with disabilities. But it's not true for the other ones. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities mandates state parties to take action, but it does not create any new rights. Now, I have to remind myself of this every time I talk about this convention. The states parties, the nations, the countries that ratify this convention have to take action. That's their duty. But it doesn't create new rights for individuals with disabilities in the treaty. And so the question that's been asked from the very beginning is this really a hybrid kind of human rights treaty, something a little different? It's development focused, which it is, and it's rights based, but it's not really creating new rights, which I think is going to make some implementation issues really interesting and maybe problematic. So the UN will tell you up front in all the literature on this convention, it's a response to a development challenge. And the statistics that they use, and I'm with whoever here said they don't believe statistics on global measures of things. I'm not sure I believe this one either, but 10% of the world's population are defined as disabled. I don't know how disability is per se being defined, although this comes from WHO, so I'm assuming it's the WHO definitions. 80% are living in developing countries. And so for them, this convention is a very clear call to development, to increase socioeconomic measures for individuals with disabilities, which will allow better access to community. So, for those of you who are still awake with law, this is the purpose statement, and I just put it up there only to say it's very broad. And I think the aim is to end discrimination on the basis of disability. Discrimination is defined in the Article 2, which is the definitional article, or at least a lot of the terms are defined there. And you can see it's also very broad. Covers economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. I mean, it's just across the board, comprehensive. It does state, however, and I think this was really an important addition, that all forms of discrimination are to be addressed, including denial of reasonable accommodation. Now, that's become a term of art in our country. We think, or at least many people think, we have a better understanding of what that means, but it's a very complicated term. And it's not the best, necessarily, of something. It's a reasonable accommodation. This was a political decision when this convention was being drafted. This is how it's defined, or this is as much definition as the UN provides. Appropriate modifications and adjustments which do not impose a disproportional or undue burden which really comes from a lot of our case law in this country. One has to provide reasonable accommodations, but not if it's going to break the bank, not if it's an undue burden. Many people were quite disappointed to see that in there, although it's also a very realistic caveat and limitation. Okay, I don't expect you to read this, but I thought maybe in a future time you would be interested in it. This is Article 9, and this is addressing accessibility, which is one of the, I mentioned, general principles in this convention. And I think it's fascinating that this came out in 2008, written in 2006, 2008, and now, you know, the technology is such that law can include very specific terminology to address information and communication technologies and systems. It's written right into the convention. Does not guarantee this for individuals with disabilities, but says states parties must take appropriate measures to ensure that individuals have access on an equal basis to others to, and then just long list is included in there. Physical, electronic, everything in the web is included. Assistive technology per se is mentioned, as well as mobility devices. That's Article 20 and Article 26, if you're interested. I just want to highlight here, again, some of the things that have been talked about. States parties must take effective measures, making them available at affordable cost. So again, I think that's, you know, again, discussing the development link and the importance of making things both affordable, usable over time, locally appropriate. States parties shall promote, et cetera, as they relate to habilitation and rehabilitation. And habilitation legally is most often associated with individuals with cognitive disabilities. To me, it's all sort of a pejorative way of looking at it, but individuals legally who have physical impairments and may need assistance, we'll talk about rehabilitation. When it's cognitive impairments, we don't talk about rehab as much as we talk about habilitation. So we're not going to get you back to some kind of whatever, but we're going to help you live with what you do have. Very different kind of concepts, and I was fascinated to see them include this in the convention. Okay, and lastly, I just want to focus on how the UN Convention addresses the importance of international cooperation. Again, a theme that's been talked about in here, and I think is really important to take a look at. States parties must recognize or shall recognize the importance of international cooperation in partnership with relevant international, regional, civil society with a particular emphasis on disabled persons organizations. Again, this theme is throughout the convention. Don't do anything without individuals with disabilities. Include them everywhere. And this is one good example, I think, where they've highlighted it. And I just underlined some of the very specific suggestions made to state parties of how they can begin to implement their duties under the convention. International development programs must be inclusive and accessible to persons with disabilities. States parties are supposed to facilitate and support capacity building, which includes, you know, exchanging of information, etc. Research and access to scientific and technical knowledge. And then providing as appropriate technical and economic assistance, facilitating access to ensuring accessible and assistive technologies, transfer of technologies. Very, very specific kinds of duties given to states parties, those who ratify this convention. Okay, 1 minute on the optional protocol. There are a couple of human rights treaties that have such a mechanism, and it potentially is going to be very important for individuals with disabilities and organizations that work on disability-related issues. Again, states parties may not ratify it, in which case it has no authority or no power within a country, but those who do. There's a committee that looks at, there's a committee set up by the UN of experts in disability issues who will review the reports that states parties are required to send on their implementation efforts. This committee will consider communications from individuals or groups, meaning NGOs, international or local NGOs, claiming to be victims, it's the term used, of a violation